The mascot platformer. Similar to how a lot of games were mission-based sandbox games due to Grand Theft Auto's rise in popularity in the 2000s, or how free-to-play mobile gaming has influenced, or infested, AAA $60 games in the most ass way possible. The mascot platformer could be attributed to the success of Mario, or Sonic, or Kirby, or to a lesser extent, Captain Novelin, the diabetic superhero. This is also evident when they all went 3D in the mid-90s. Even though 3D games felt like the next gimmick, you could say it was because of the new hardware at the time. Guess who became the frontrunner again? However, there is one game I'd like to bring up, a game I had since my childhood. Some believe it to be a hidden gem, most probably don't give a shit, and the other 4 or 5 people are still holding out for that Nintendo 64 sequel. So what the hell is Plok? So the first level of Plok is simple. You go to the left, no, not the right, the left, reach the secret island, punch the fruit, ride a helicopter in a race against time, and skip half of the island. This has to be a Japanese game, but what part of Japan does this come from? Okay, where in Japan is England? Developed by Software Creations and released in 1993, a Manchester-based developer that worked on licensed games for the most part, Plok is a 2D platformer exclusive to the Super Nintendo. Plok only sold around 200,000 units in Europe and North America, and about 20,000 in Japan. These numbers were confirmed by John and Steve Pickford, the brothers who designed the game. Plok was meant to be an arcade game called Flea Pit, which would utilize Rare's unreleased Raz board hardware. That never came to be because the developer, Zippo Games, went out of business before finishing the game. Before release, Plok piqued the interest of one Shigeru Miyamoto with the intention of having Nintendo publish Plok. Unfortunately, Nintendo declined to publish Plok and focused more on the development of Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island instead. Despite this, Plok was featured on the Super Mario All-Stars promotional VHS that was only released in Europe in 1993. Tradewest, the publisher of the Battletoads and Double Dragon games, would step in to publish Plok. How did he get the name Plok, you ask?
I had a vivid memory that the name of the character came about by accident when John was messing around, randomly sticking the letters from a video cassette label onto his mouse.
Back to the game. Most side-scrollers have one goal: move to the right and don't die, and maybe save a princess along the way. And yet Plok has 3 story arcs. I'm not kidding. The first is Plok sleeping through his ADT home security alarm and waking up to realize his flag was stolen by the Bobbin Bros on Cotton Island. He gets his flag back and sails back to his home on acrylic, only to realize that all of his flags have been taken in his absence and replaced by flea flags. The second, in the midst of his flea purge, Plok dreams about his grandpappy and his search for the lost amulet, which gives Plok the ability to turn into the at the cost of shells. And third, Plok finds the amulet and wreaks havoc on acrylic until he reaches the flea pit, kills the flea queen, then sleeps. No princess to rescue, no alien threats to civilization, nor an ancient evil entity awakening from its 1,000-year slumber. Just a man so pissed off that he killed everything with a pulse, just to get his flags back. There's 2 kinds of levels in this game. There's levels where you just get to the flagpole and move on, and levels where you have to kill all the fleas in the level to get your flag back, then get to the flagpole. You get an arrow that helps you find missing fleas. The fleas don't pose much of a threat. Most of the enemies don't either. They just hop around and they don't attack you. You have to accelerate their birth by smacking their eggs around, which you think would kill them. Do chickens grow faster when you punch their eggs? It's best to just use the buzzsaw move as it ignores their ludicrously long iframes. Projectiles, however, are your biggest threat in the entire game. The yellow things that you have to shoot to ride, the rock people that spit rocks at you, these flowers, especially the big flower that shoots small flowers that shoot at you. Let's just call them pain elementals for now. You also get these gotcha, bitch moments with the logs. Little bastards just pop out of nowhere, even if you know one of them is coming. The shell warp areas, the ones that look like the last level of Contra, they're neat, even if they give you barely enough time to catch the shells. The motorcycle secret in the Crashing Rocks level, and these fleas in the creepy forest here, they stay up there if you miss them and you have to climb all the way back up to get them. This wouldn't be so bad if the stage wasn't filled with revolving spike doors that take a century and a half to let you walk through it. There's also this Plok continue glitch where you get a Plok continue, then die, then get a game over, and then when you hit continue, you start on the level after the one you died on. And Go Home Cavern can fuck right off. It only gets worse in the flea pit. We're in the salty spittoon now, the bane of my childhood in all of its asshole-clenching glory. Shooting eggs while dodging a bullet storm of blueberries, the feeling of death following you at every corner, and these goddamn flea bats! The flea pit is the last area, and rightfully so. You're forced to do vehicle sections until the final boss, which sucks because I got used to the smooth controls of Plok, and the vehicles were relegated to secret areas that you'd probably miss, unless you punch all the healing fruit. You get to drive a spaceship that goes from 0 to 60 in a femtosecond, to a tank that moves slower than your grandma's Jazzy. Okay, this part right here. So your tank has a pretty significant knockback when you shoot. It makes the section where you shoot these eggs from a tiny rotating platform that much more fun. Thanks, England. The motorcycle and the car are fine. Everything else sucks, especially the helicopter and the rocket chair. Props for the patriotism and the realistic unicycle physics. It's a shame you don't get to play as normal Plok in these levels. I would argue that Plok controls better than Mario. He has 2 jumps like Mario, a short bounce and a long spin jump, which, combined with the amulet, makes you, like I stated earlier, the... He can also slide down slopes like Mario World Mario, but unlike Mario World Mario, he can duck walk. He can crouch, which means, you guessed it, he can teabag. His main gimmick is that he throws his limbs to attack enemies and his targets. Hitting targets helps you progress through each level and sends Plok's limbs to a wire hanger where you have to collect them. Not having limbs in this game is a death sentence. Some levels get creative with this concept, like, God fucking damn it, Go Home Cavern, where you have to play half of the level without your legs. It is the absolute worst. You also get gems that give you invincibility for a few seconds, and these present boxes that give you costumes that give you powers. You get boxing gloves, a flamethrower, a blunderbuss, rockets, a joke fire extinguisher, and the most useful one. Almost forgot. You could summon hornets. Now, a lot of people claim that Plok is hard. Even the Pickfords will side with you on this. It definitely gets up there in challenge. The secret areas become ridiculous as you progress, and the difficulty curve is more like... Did I mention the logs? Everything you need to know is explained in the game's, and I shit you not, 12-minute demo sequence. I had the Super Nintendo cartridge since I was a kid, and I didn't beat the game for years. Well, I'm a man now. I saved all the hostages in Mega Man X6. I fear nothing. You can choose to play on Child's Play, which is probably the most hilarious and insulting difficulty mode I've ever seen. Enemies move slow as hell, logs can be punched, and more than half of the game and its ending are omitted from this mode. Plok is challenging, but it's also a pretty long game for a side-scroller. 3 to 4 hours, give or take. Donkey Kong Country and Super Mario World are long games, sure, but they had a save battery. Even 30-hour RPGs were common for the Super Nintendo, but they had a save battery. Not for Plok. Not even a password. You're not beating this in one sitting unless you like punching every fruit and skipping parts of the game. You can even skip entire boss fights if you wanted to. Let's talk about the bosses. The Bobbins brothers. The first fight in the game, and they don't fuck around. They mainly just hop around and spit a bunch of shit at you. If you think this is bad, just imagine trying to fight 3 of them instead of 2. Wait. The Penkinos. So you have to punch these targets to make the spikes come out of the wall so you can hurt them. And sometimes they go out of sync and they fly over or under the spikes, which could be a huge pain in the ass because you can't hit them. Womack Spider, or Eric's Ambush the prequel. This can get pretty tough when the green peas start filling up the screen and the game basically becomes Toho. Hold up, giant spider, large overworld, flag at the end of each level? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Rocky fella. You just gotta dodge his hands and then wait for his head to pop out to damage him. It's not a hard fight, just some pattern recognition and some patience. The Flea Queen. The final boss. Most final bosses look something like this. The final boss of Plok looks like this. Have fun bouncing uncontrollably. He's even got a little Union Jack helmet. The Majesty would be quite pleased. Question: Why would Plok use a joke fire extinguisher when he has a goddamn tank? Also, there's no reason for him to use the springs. You can't hurt the queen when she's on the ceiling. I also noticed that you can't use your buzzsaw power on the bosses. Perhaps it's to balance the boss fights, but what good is my amulet if I can't use it against the bosses? Plok definitely has some drawbacks, but the game more than makes up for it with its presentation. The art and the graphics are top notch. The game even goes into a silent era movie theme for the Grandpappy Plok stages, which is pretty sweet. It even says intermission instead of pause. The banter between Plok and the bosses is a nice touch. And I've been diddled again. It just speaks for itself. Plok is just overflowing with charm from level 1 onward. I already stated how smooth Plok controls, plus his limb throwing gimmick is brilliant in my opinion. If you're looking for a challenge, this game's definitely gonna bring you one. It's challenging because it was designed that way, and not because its controls are busted. Can we talk about this soundtrack? Because this soundtrack has no business being this good. Geoff and Tim Follin were gods of the chiptune. Especially Tim. They've worked on pretty much every retro system you can think of. Nintendo Entertainment System, Commodore 64, Amiga, Genesis, ZX Spectrum, you name it. What do you think the soundtrack to a game like Pictionary would sound like? Is it anything like this? Absolute madman. The Fallen brothers basically took whatever hardware they had, no matter the technical limitations, and basically made miracles with it. Let me explain. The Super Nintendo has 8 channels for sound, meaning that it can play no more than 8 sounds at any given time. Plok doesn't use 8 channels for its music, nor does it use 7. Plok uses 5. 5 channels for its music, and just listen to how full it sounds. They achieved this effect by having chords instead of single notes coming out of the sound channels. You can hear this in the acoustic guitar and the synth samples of the game. Allegedly, Miyamoto thought that there was some modification to the Super Nintendo's hardware to produce the music for Plok, especially the harmonica at the beginning. To be fair, Plok isn't the only Super Nintendo game to use 5 channels for music. There's this other obscure game you've probably never heard of. Now, if you want an example of a game that uses all 8 channels for its music, the only problem with using 8 channels for music is that the instruments cut out to make room for the explosions and other sound effects, a problem that Plok doesn't have. Plok's soundtrack isn't impressive because of its technical aspects, but its compositional ones as well. It's all over the damn place. Songs can be 3-minute-long prog rock inspired songs taking influence from bands like Jethro Tull, Yes, and King Crimson. There's also silent era movie piano, knockoff Rocky music, rave music for bosses, and a genre I like to call spooky shit. The OST suffers from what I like to call the Fallen Brothers' curse. The games they wrote music for would suffer one of 2 fates, with a few exceptions like Time Tracks for the Sega Genesis, as it was near completion but never released. The first is that the game would hit store shelves, like the Silver Surfer or Treasure Master for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and fans of the AVGN know how those games turned out.
Well, no, it isn't bad. It's fucking horrible!
Just look at Tim's resume. Thomas the Tank Engine, Magic Johnson's Fast Break. Oh look, another video game that James reviewed.
This is fucked beyond belief!
The second is that the game wasn't a piece of shit, but it wasn't a breakthrough hit either. Like Plok. It's a damn shame because his soundtracks are always the best part of the games he worked on. He just happened to be a brilliant programmer who happened to be an awesome composer who was just stuck with mediocre games. GST something made a pretty in-depth retrospective on Tim Follin's career that you should definitely check out. Link in the description. The real question, is Plok a hidden gem? I think I'll leave that one up to you. It's definitely worth a playthrough if you've got the time. It's safe to say that a game that hasn't had any sequels in 26 years is dead, right? Not exactly. Plok makes an appearance in the Atari Lynx game Zaku, which came out in 2009 by the way. There's an ongoing comic series created by the Pickford Bros about Plok, link in the description. The game gets featured on the Games Done Quick speedrun marathons from time to time, and the soundtrack gets remixed occasionally. It's anyone's guess whether or not the Pickford brothers will come around and give us that long-awaited Nintendo 64 sequel. I just hate to see ideas with potential get pushed to the wayside. On the other hand, it's better to die a hero than live long enough to see yourself become the Bobcat. Seriously, who's still buying this shit?